Turning towards the metaverse.
Talking ad nauseum about the metaverse.
There's been a lot of snark about what exactly the metaverse is.
The metaverse, a byproduct of COVID isolation, mass-produced virtual reality headsets in the burgeoning Web3 space.
If we think back a couple of years, we had, huge companies investing in metaverse divisions and hiring chief metaverse officers and whole strategies around this.
Banks started opening branches in the metaverse. Celebrities made headlines buying property in the metaverse. ETFs around the metaverse trade started popping up.
While we were all still sort of under pandemic lockdown. So there was over-exuberance in metaverse because people were looking to socialize and it wasn't that easy to do in real life.
At the peak of the metaverse hype cycle, Citibank estimated the space could hit $13 trillion in valuation by 2030. Microsoft threw its hat in the metaverse ring. Even Web3 and crypto projects capitalized on the trend, with decentralized metaverses like Decentraland and Sandbox.
People would take this sort of idea of a digital asset, apply that to the 3D virtual worlds, and huzzah, you've got the metaverse.
But when it comes to the metaverse, no one stakes their claim on the space more than Facebook.
Facebook is announcing its name change officially, now changing its corporate name to Meta.
The next platform and medium will be even more immersive, an embodied internet where you're in the experience, not just looking at it.
In October of 2021, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg placed his trillion-dollar social media company at the forefront of the metaverse conversation, investing heavily in its Reality Labs segment, kicking off the entire Wall Street hype cycle.
There was genuinely a need and a desire at the time for Facebook, the company, to rebrand into something else.
The metaverse was Facebook's answer to an increasingly online population, with Zuckerberg estimating 1 billion users by the end of the decade. So that leads us to ask, where is everybody?
If you build it, they will come. I think we're all still waiting to see if people will come.
This is an interesting segment. I didn't realize how big Meta was getting in COVID times. I think for myself, this doesn't seem surprising, especially coming from following like the game industry and things that are happening there. I think a similar phenomenon happens for like MMOs, for instance, like massive multiplayer online games, where there's a lot of hype around how this is going to be the big thing. Everyone's going to be there. People usually join these when they launch in mass, and then they kind of see what there is to it, and then they start to dwindle. And then one of the issues with these spaces in general and other things like it is that you need a population base to keep it going. And so you need the population to continue growing over time for it to continue being useful and for people to want to keep interacting there. And usually once you hit a point where your user growth is actually going negative, and so you're losing members, usually it goes downhill from there, and it's pretty much impossible to get it back up. Because again, usually in these types of scenarios, there's so much that's supposed to be user-generated content that kind of brings other people here. So if you don't have users, they're not generating content or interest for other users, and then other users aren't here to be interested, and then it kind of feeds back on itself in a negative way. And this type of thing has been tried before. I want to say that there was a game called like Second Life or something like that, that obviously wasn't like VR or AR related. But I want to say it's kind of similar in so much as I think it's a much older scenario, but basically people went on there to kind of have their own avatar and kind of live out their life and like do random things there, and it not being necessarily like a game, so to speak, but like an environment in which you can hang out. And that was a very niche activity. And so there's a number of folks who do, they might even still be interacting with that today. That becomes a very niche environment to be in. And this sounds like something similar where things aren't so advanced to replace reality or be a substitute for reality. And so it's going to be hard for folks to come here and then spend a massive amount of their time unless there's already a big user base hanging out here on a regular basis.
To understand the metaverse and Meta's role in the space, first we have to figure out what exactly it is.
The metaverse cannot be defined.
Kind of like a virtual digital world, universe, if you will. in which people can essentially have like their internet counterpart, essentially like an avatar of yourself, live inside this virtual world.
An open-ended, interconnected world with user-driven content and the potential for the users to cross into other platforms.
Trying to define what a metaverse or the metaverse is was kind of one of the biggest issues that actually surrounded the metaverse overall as a concept, because it was never really universally agreed upon.
While it's difficult to nail down an exact definition of a metaverse, the term predates Meta and virtual reality headsets. Online platforms like Second Life came about in the 2000s and are considered early examples of metaverses, virtual spaces where players could assume digital identities and interact with other players from around the globe. Originating primarily from the video game space, more recent examples of metaverses include multiplayer games like Fortnite and Roblox. Even Blizzard's World of Warcraft could be defined as a metaverse.
You have Fortnite, Roblox, which are like 2D versions of a metaverse where they are these kind of immersive open world platforms.
So if metaverses already existed, why did the term gain popularity in 2021? Well, a lot of it has to do with the advancement of virtual reality.
If you're talking to a CTO of a big Fortune 500 company and trying to, say what technology trends you need to be up to date with, at that time, VR, the metaverse, kind of checked all of those boxes.
There was a bit of a sense in 2020 and into 2021 that this was a technology that was ready, that it was finally going to hit the big time, because, we've had a lot of false dawns in virtual reality in the past.
Yeah, they kind of highlighted how that term didn't become popularized until like 2021. And again, that's mostly because of Meta, because they coined that specific version of that phrase. There's always been a term to reference. They even highlighted MMOs and Second Life, as I had previously highlighted. And so there's always been a way to refer to those things previously, like an MMO, for instance, in the video game space. An alternate reality or something like that. And so there's always been different terms that people have used over time. And so metaverse is just Meta's version of highlighting it. Arguably, like Pokemon Go, for instance, had their own version, but I don't think they even named it. It was just how the game worked, and you would just refer to it as Pokemon Go, like how you have an AR version and there's kind of this layer on top of reality that you can only experience through the game. And they didn't coin a phrase for it. And so that's where metaverse isn't, I wouldn't even necessarily consider it a generic term, though they use the very generic way of labeling it. That is a term that mostly Meta themselves has pushed in recent times. And that's why it's gaining prevalence, not because it's a new concept, but because this is the new branding of what this could be.
There have been many times when people have said, this technology is only a year or two away from being the next big thing.
And that is where Reality Labs played a huge role for Meta. Created in 2014 after its acquisition of VR startup Oculus, Meta started ramping up investment in Reality Labs over the past 5 years. In December of 2021, 2 months after changing its name, Meta officially launched its online multiplayer virtual reality game, Horizon Worlds.
So they are referencing video games a lot. This is generally where I think of this space, which is video games have generally been trying to do this exact thing for so many years, which is they're trying to create a space that's digital that people engage with and interact with on a regular basis. The metaverse was basically just trying to do that with VR technology added on top. There isn't really a big distinction between the universe in which you'd be interacting. It's just the medium and the technology you're using to interact with that world, quote unquote. And again, to use another example, since they're highlighting video games here, technically like MySpace and Facebook were versions of this. Like MySpace was supposed to be a way that you could interact and you didn't necessarily have to use like your real identity. And I think that was one of the big differences that Facebook made that differentiated itself, is that you could find people you knew in Facebook, and Facebook was effectively an online digital environment in which you could interact with other people that you knew. And again, it's not a new phenomenon. We just call that social media in that case, and it just depends on how you interact with it. And one of the key differences here is that they're trying to use like a 360 degree like view into it, which is a new spin. But the concept, again, is pretty core to a variety of things that we have interacted with ourselves in society over the last few decades.
You know, by the end of the decade, we hope to basically get to around 1 billion people in the metaverse doing hundreds of dollars of commerce each.
A goal that is looking less and less achievable.
I think of the big moment as when the pictures came out of Mark Zuckerberg's avatar in Horizon Worlds a couple years ago. And it's this incredibly low quality avatar. And people are like, this is what we're supposed to be getting excited about. This is what you're saying is the future. Who would want to go into this space?
The problem with Metaverse is people assumed that they would be developed instantaneously. And even Facebook, Meta, trying to do it in an environment where they're a publicly traded company and have to show success on a quarterly basis was even too fast for a company as well-funded as Meta was.
Now, 3 years after changing its name, Meta's Metaverse has largely fallen out of the tech conversation. Google searches for the term Metaverse are near flat just 3 years after hitting a peak in October of 2021.
Undoubtedly, the last couple of years, we've seen the Metaverse hugely drop away in popularity.
Now Reality Labs faces an eye-watering $58 billion in operating losses since 2020. And insider reports from 2022 revealed Horizon Worlds was averaging around 200,000 monthly active users in its first year, less than.
So again, this isn't surprising to me. I think to reference other things that are like this, they even showed like Snoop Dogg having some real estate that people had to purchase. There's another like app or game called, I think it's like Atlas Earth, something like that, where it's sort of similar to like a Pokemon Go, where it's like an AR version. It kind of is an overlay to reality, and you can buy real estate or segments of the planet. And one of the challenges with this is that they created their own version of that. It's not like there's a one and done plot of land that we all agree on. Even if you use something like blockchain, for instance, it would just be that version. So that's where, like, if you had Planet Earth 1 coin, it would be able to have a plot of land for every piece of real estate, for instance, on the planet. But then somebody else could just come up with, like, Planet Earth 2 coin, and it would have its own version of that exact same piece of real estate, and then you could just buy it there. And so that is the key difference with reality and these virtual worlds is there's just one plot of land in reality that you can buy, and so that uniqueness, that thing that you can't duplicate, is what gives it inherent value in some situations where you wouldn't otherwise. I think another example is like NFTs, where this is where people were trying to like generate this pseudo uniqueness through non-fungible tokens and then trying to sell those and then kind of selling people on the premise of here's a unique thing that is digital, even though it's not that unique, and you could just make other NFTs or you can make other versions of NFTs within a variety of systems. And so it can only be so unique within a particular world. And again, this is where everyone would have to agree that one version exists, and that's never going to happen. Like with Bitcoin, for instance, they created a new way of making transactions online, and a bunch of Bitcoin or a bunch of cryptocurrencies were created. And so there isn't one single ledger that keeps track of all exchange of digital currency or cryptocurrency. There's dozens or hundreds of them now. And so you could have something purchased in Bitcoin, you could have something purchased in Ethereum or something like that. And so it reduces its unique value proposition by having all those variations exist. And so I think those are another example of where people were trying to make digital transaction meaningful in these like virtual environments that we have seen kind of not grow as much. Because again, all that would be necessary is like Google comes up with their own version of the metaverse, like the pseudoverse or something like that, and then have everything be identical. But then maybe something that's valuable like Snoop Dogg's house in the metaverse, nobody would own it in the pseudoverse, and then somebody would go and buy it, and then boom, you've kind of dropped the value in both worlds because now you know there's two versions of Snoop Dogg's house. One in the metaverse that's very expensive and one in the pseudoverse that's very cheap. And so again, this is kind of where you can just artificially create supply, and that just devalues that asset when these systems occur like that.
Half of Meta's original goal of 500,000.
If it didn't do this and it decided just to be a social company, which it absolutely could have done, it would have saved it billions of dollars in terms of what it spent on Reality Labs.
So what happened? Why didn't people flock to the metaverse? Well, there's been a lot of finger pointing, but most arguments come back to the same conclusion. No one's really figured out a solid use case for the broad adoption of a metaverse.
The audience wasn't necessarily there at the time, and so hence I think you see that sort of pullback away from it.
Meta pitched the metaverse as a place to both work and play. Companies could host a virtual meeting, you could socialize with friends and play games in Horizon Worlds. Shopping and e-commerce were also part of that early vision.
We're promised all these amazing experiences like Ready Player One, that it could be a wider difference than what we're actually seeing when we get in the device.
To put it simply, people really didn't care. Video game players had their own metaverses already, and the metaverse hype cycle ended up being, well, a lot of hype. And it wasn't just Meta who felt the metaverse bubble pop. Web3 metaverses like Decentraland and Sandbox saw trading activity fall significantly on their site after 2022. Sandbox's unique active wallets, a way to measure daily active users on the platform, fell below 100 in early 2024, meaning less than 100 people were active on the platform day to day.
98% of those projects are totally dead today. The other 2% of them have lost, 95% of their market cap since the highs of 2021.
And Wall Street's been pulling back too, with several metaverse ETFs closing up shop over the past 2 years.
We continue to hope that somebody's going to figure out a killer use case for VR, and even Apple has struggled to do so. I don't think metaverse anytime soon, using hardware that's readily available now, is going to be happening.
So why keep investing in something that is an obvious cash burn? Well, when it comes to Meta's metaverse, this isn't the metaverse.
This is the metaverse, or at least it's a piece of it.
The metaverse, it's this broad thing. It's not just virtual and augmented reality, although those are going to be some of the new major computing platforms.
When it comes to defining its own metaverse, Meta says Horizon Worlds isn't the entire metaverse, it's only part of the larger interconnected metaverse ecosystem. That includes the software like Horizon Worlds and the Horizon operating system, as well as wearables like Oculus VR headsets and Meta's newest addition, its Orion AR glasses.
We've been investing for this for a long time just because we are asking the question sort of what comes after the smartphone.
It's what many consider to be Meta's end game, a foothold in the hardware space, a space that has previously eluded them.
It's playing a long game with the hope that it pays off, and the hope being it gives Meta that platform, the computing platform that they crave, the place where they can set the rules. They don't have to abide by the rules of gatekeepers like Apple or Google. They get to have their own walls, their own building, and have their own developer ecosystem within this new computing paradigm.
Meta's Oculus headsets are the top-selling virtual reality headsets in the world, capturing 60% of the VR headset marketplace. Still, that's holding space in a seemingly declining market, as US sales of all VR and AR headsets dropped 40% in 2023 compared to the year prior. Meta did not respond to CNBC's request for comment.
Not very many companies have the luxury of having an enormous amount of cash and having an incredibly powerful advertising business that provides them with a constant stream of money to be doing these investments.
I meet people every day who think Mark Zuckerberg invented VR, which is just a crazy notion.
It is through this that Meta can get its own hardware into people's hands, cutting out the middlemen of Apple and Google. Earlier this year, Mark Zuckerberg sat down with the hosts of Acquired to discuss this exact topic.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg did not in any way create virtual reality. Again, this seems to be more of like them trying to be an amalgamation of a variety of things that exist. I think as that individual referenced earlier, like Ready Player One. And the advantage of doing so is if you are the first dominant player in that space, you could absorb a huge portion of the market. But again, so many things have tried to be this with less advanced technology, like Second Life, like Facebook itself, like Instagram, TikTok, World of Warcraft, like Roblox. And all of the problems that each of these things have is that they're all exciting and they're all dominant in their time, but it's hard to become the dominant player forever. And what Meta was trying to do was to become the first dominant player, so that way they could get a huge swath of the payment and the cash that would go in there. And so they're hoping to be the first one in that space by amalgamating all this technology, because somebody is going to do it. It's unsure whether that's going to be in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years from now. But with things like Ready Player One, there's clearly a desire for something like this to exist, and it's going to be cool when it does. And so if you're the first one there, there's a lot of money to be had, but it's also easy to mistime it. And there's also a chance that like you'd have a better time trying to transform something that already exists, like a Roblox, for instance, into that world, little by little, using your existing user base, as opposed to trying to build a user base from scratch and the environment from scratch and make it interesting so that folks can interact with it on a regular basis.
Saying Meta controlling its destiny is strategically valuable.
I think we might be like twice as profitable if we own the platform or something. So I think from that perspective, that's worth a lot. Just from like a pure like dollars perspective, which is not primarily how I come at this stuff.
What Meta did was try to become the company that was building the hard part of the metaverse, which was figuring out the hardware.
It's expensive, losing a lot of money doing it, but it's a bet that they're willing to take.
And controlling the hardware and software ecosystem also means access to two extremely profitable spaces that Meta is intimately familiar with: user data and advertising.
In-game advertising has grown by about 10% a year over the last several years, and it's about a $140 billion industry today.
Meta's ad ambitions are much more grand than just saying, here's a new helmet to put on your character and dress up your avatar with, where, Fortnite and Roblox are more kind of on that tier, where Meta's trying to do what they're doing with Facebook advertising, and they're trying to run the ecosystem.
All goes according to plan, you would have a big online economy going through these metaverses, future metaverses, both the physical with AR to the virtual world and, full 3D VR.
That's where augmented reality comes into play, an arena big tech is investing heavily in. Again, here's Mark Zuckerberg speaking with the Acquired podcast on his vision for AR.
Everyone who had a phone before replaced it with a smartphone, and then a lot of more people got smartphones. If all we get is all the people in the world who already have glasses upgrading to glasses that have AI in them, then this is already going to be one of the most successful products in the history of the world. So, and I think it's going to go a lot further than that.
Traditionally, we've thought about the metaverse, or a lot of people thought about the metaverse as specifically a 3D world and virtual reality. But, Meta has really made it a point to be, AR, augmented reality, blended into the physical world is a really important play.
That's an incredibly powerful thing. If Meta's able to catch that position as a platform player for the next generation of computing, which is, I think, the real ambition here, that puts it in a totally different position to where it's been functioning so far.
So maybe we haven't seen the end of Meta's metaverse ambitions. Maybe the metaverse didn't go anywhere. It could just be another decade before we see the ultimate plans of Reality Labs come to fruition.
It's absolutely been easy to tease Meta and to kind of point the finger and maybe critique the investments, and that's been a challenge for the company. But I think it's inarguable that if not the Meta, the category it may not still be really even alive and kicking.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I will see you around.